For more on President Tshisekedi's second and final 5-year mandate, we're now joined by political analyst Musa Mdunge. Mr. Mdunge, a pleasure to have you on the program this evening. Now, in light of the recent election results, what are your initial thoughts on the outcome and also its implications for the country?
Good evening, Glandla, and to your viewers, and let me say Happy New Year for this 2024. So, these elections have been very interesting. Given, the situation, the security situation in the DRC, the political and economic challenges in that country, the results in favor of the incumbent are not surprising at all. It was expected that he would win the day. Given the fragmentation among opposition parties, their inability to find a unity candidate well in advance of these elections in order to build a message around that candidate really impacted their ability to present a credible alternative to the incumbent, and it showed in these elections. Moreover, if we look at, the turnout of these elections, only about 43 of the electorate came out to vote, or, the population that is, and that really speaks to the failure, of the government, of the political leaders and the candidates to really sell the importance of this election, but more so, given the failures of the state in the past 63 years, it is very much easy to see why so many people would be disinterested in these elections, viewing them as nothing else rather than a rubber stamp of the incumbent and the political elite. So these elections really are very interesting, and what we need to see is whether the Constitutional Court will agree to the legitimacy of these elections and their results. So I think it was a bit premature for our president to congratulate him when these results are provisional and not final results.
Musa, the opposition and some civil society groups in that country have also raised concerns about massive logistical problems during the election, also casting doubt on the validity of the results. How do you assess these concerns, and what impact might they have on the political landscape of the DR Congo?
Well, we already know that these particular elections, just in terms of the funding, the infrastructure around these elections, DRC has faced a huge challenge. One can say kudos to the government in the fact that these elections were funded in bulk by the state, but challenges around funding and also the credibility of even the Electoral Commission, given the closeness between the CEO of the Electoral Commission as well as the president himself. And it showed as well these challenges in the fact that you had delays in elections running 5 days, past the time of the election should have taken place. And in certain areas, particularly in the east of the DRC, where we see conflict dominated by the M23 rebel group, as supported by Rwanda, there have been challenges in certain areas in hosting those elections. So very much so, these elections feel like they don't represent the very interests and the aspirations of the people of the DRC. And as much as President Tshisekedi has received a majority, 73% of these votes, if you are to look at the totality of the population, then really his support is just but a fragment and sits really at about 30 to 35% of the population. And that is the concern, that it doesn't seem like he has the backing of the people in its totality.
So I want to take the words of businessman Moise Katumbi, who finished second in the election with about 18% of the vote. Now, he has since rejected the results along with other opposition candidates. What factors do you believe contribute to this widespread rejection, and what potential consequences could it have for the stability of the nation?
Well, one, you have to look at the sentiments towards the political institutions in that country. The very fact that he comes out with his party and his alliance members to reject not only these results, but also to cast aspersion and doubt on the credibility of the Constitutional Court as an independent arbiter of the law in the DRC is quite a huge indictment and presents a problem to the credibility of state institutions and their ability to pass judgment on these elections. And in many cases, then this speaks to what I've spoken about before, that what we need in terms of, the African Union is particularly to strengthen, electoral support. And perhaps what we need to do is to look at a continental body that will be independent without influence from these individual countries' political leaders in order to adjudicate on such elections where the credibility is at doubt. And that becomes very key. And the very fact that he then decides to say that we reject this going to the Constitutional Court, we will not, in fact, put papers to challenge this, but rather we will go to the streets, is, I would like to believe, very irresponsible for a political candidate who seeks to build a better DRC, by averting to old ways. How then do you move forward? And that is the challenge that one must pose to the opposition leaders as they think about a response towards these elections.
Mr. Mdunge, also worrying is the history of disputed elections in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. It often leads to violence as well. How do you see the current political climate, and what do you make of some of the measures to be taken to address the lack of trust in the country's institutions?
Well, the challenge is you've got to look at the political culture in a country. And I often tell, my second-year students that when you study a particular country, you need to begin to diagnose the political culture as shaped by history, as shaped by other factors such as culture and religion, but also the power dynamics in that particular country. And unfortunately, for the DRC, its political culture in the past 63 years has been one of political violence. And unfortunately, the work needed to create institutions where the rule of law is embedded and is part and parcel of the workings of the system has not taken root. And it's not unique to the DRC. We see this challenge in other African countries. And so there really needs to be a conversation about how do you strengthen institutions. And it'll be interesting to see how the incumbent deals with that. The strengthening of institutions, ensuring the independence of organs of state such as the judiciary, ensuring that observer missions have full access to every part and particle of the election process, from the inception, the planning, up until the announcement of the results. But we need to see this move to a continental priority. And it doesn't help that both SADC, both the East African community within the countries that are members of these bodies, because of the kind of interest they have in the DRC, are unable to speak with one voice, and they were able to then speak to the kind of work that the continent and these particular regions need to do in order to strengthen the credibility of elections, because we know the credibility of elections is very critical to peace and security. And this has been a challenge for Africa. And if we are going to silence the guns, as our leaders keep on proposing, then we need to look at the nature of the institutions and how we strengthen it, and how do countries that have better institutions support each other so that we see better security and peace in the continent. It's not just for the people of the DRC, but for all of us as Africans to think about this matter very critically.
So we spoke about the logistical challenges, including late openings at polling stations and also issues with voter cards. They have also been highlighted quite greatly as significant problems in that country. In your view, how might these challenges then impact the credibility of the election process? And what improvements could be made for future elections in the DRC?
Well, it is about capacity building. Often when we think about the public service, you will hear people, even within the South African context, talking about slashing the public service. But people don't always give due consideration to the quality of that public service. You've got to do a skills audit. What are the kind of skills you have in a country? And then you begin to build around capacity around that. So for the DRC, in order for the next elections to not be cast in doubt, you've already got to plan for those elections already now, just after these elections, and speak towards doing first an audit of these particular elections. Where did they get it right? Where did they get it wrong? Then you need to look at a critical skills audit not only from a logistical perspective, but from a personnel perspective. Look at your human capital and then strengthen that and begin to work around building capacity. But here's the unfortunate thing, elections cost money. Money equals the economy. And unfortunately for the DRC, its economy has faced huge challenges. As mineral rich as it may be, we know the cost of living due to inflation and as well as the fall of the Congolese franc against the US dollar has had an impact on food security and prices and even energy costs in that country. And so, unfortunately, it's a dual process here. Building capacity, but a feed of that capacity is a strong economy in order that you then are able to run these elections and run a credible state. And these are the things that we've got to think about. Not just think about elections in isolation, but the quality of those elections may well depend on the quality of the state, but also the economy and its ability to support those credible elections. And that's the thing that I think as Africans are not truly thinking about, and we need to look at it very critically.
Musa Mdunge, let me thank you for your time.